Before Steve Rogers could do this all day, before Batman asked Superman if he could bleed, before Venom got weirdly obsessed with the pancreas, there was a superhero boom in the movies of the late 80s and early 90s that paved the way for the golden age we are presently experiencing. But how did these movies prepare audiences for seeing comic book heroes on the big screen? What mistakes did they make? A topic this big is too big for one show, so Andy Nelson joined the folks from Road to Infinity and the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcasts for a crossover event at this year's Phoenix Fan Fusion. And we are lucky that they actually turned on the recording device to share it with you this fine July hiatus. Enjoy!
Thank you all for coming today. Today we have an incredible panel for you. We are going to have a live podcast recording. We have four, correct? Four?
Three.
We're one person.
We are a single podcast.
Yes.
We have three podcasts represented by four people. And they're going to talk about the history of superhero cinema. All of us love the Marvel films, the MCU, but that's not where it all started. We're going to have the opportunity to take a look back at the history of where it came from and potentially where it might be going. Or maybe I'm putting words in their mouths. Before we get into the actual content today, I'd like to give them all an opportunity to introduce themselves. Starting with Chrissy.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Chrissy. And with me is Nathan Blackwell.
Hello, everyone.
We're the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast, where we watch the movies of the 80s that we love.
Question mark?
Question mark?
Love, exclamation point?
Yes.
Hate, question mark? And hate, exclamation point.
Exclamation point. With 2019 eyes to see whether or not they're as wonderful as we remember.
Are they?
It's a mixed bag.
You'll have to listen to the podcast to find out.
Yeah.
I like that book.
Yes. Often surprised by what I truly love now, like as an adult, and when I'm like, ew, why was I obsessed with this movie? Yeah.
Duly noted. All right.
Nathan Blackwell, also the Most Excellent 80s Movie podcast. I'm a filmmaker, and so that's also part of one of the takes is
right.
that
she's
a
mentioned.
comedian, I'm a filmmaker, so we're lending different perspectives. But
Yes, his perspective is one of knowledge, and mine is one of stupidity.
You may take twice as long because there's only one of you.
Because I'm just one person. Hi, everybody. I'm Andy Nelson from The Next Reel. The Next Reel is a film podcast, and we have another podcast called The Marvel Movie Minute, and that is why I'm here, because we talk about the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. A lot of minutes to discuss on our show.
And yes, it is as awesome as it sounds.
Yes.
It is very detailed and very nerdy, and we love it.
Imagine that 1 minute from the Iron Man movie that you just loved and talk about it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And sometimes
Yes.
it's a minute of hammering.
Yeah, I know. Right. Who knew you would
That
have
was a good minute.
such a key moment in the franchise to
I did love
discuss?
that.
yeah, Chrissy and I were guests on that, and we did how many? 5 episodes?
5.
5 episodes.
And we never
yeah.
got out of the cave.
Nope. Yep, you were in the cave the whole time.
All right, I'm Kyle Olson. I'm from the Road to Infinity podcast. It's a Marvel Movies podcast. We decided to watch a Marvel movie a week in anticipation of Infinity War, and then when we found out Infinity War was actually part 1 of 2, we sort of kept going, and now we keep talking about all the Marvel stuff. What I like to do is give a little bit of perspective in terms of where the comics were, what the original characters came from, and what the differences in the storyline, plus a little bit of background of where Hollywood was and what was going on at the time that the movies came out to give it a little bit of context, and then we get super nerdy about all the Marvel movies. So we're going to be, we are sort of waiting for Spider-Man. That's our big thing. But then after that, we're going to try and come out with some more regular stuff in between, because it's going to be 10 months before the next Marvel movie after that. So we're going to do some stuff in between to keep Marvel fans happy.
Marvel's taking a break?
Right.
I have learned so much about the history of Marvel movies that I had no idea about by listening to that podcast. It's good stuff. So, Subscribe to all of these podcasts because they are awesome, and these are awesome people you want to listen to on a regular basis.
We'll wait.
Including for the next hour.
Yes.
As we talk about the secret origins of superhero cinema. So today, our podcasters have taken a look at history of superhero cinema and broken it into 3 distinct eras. They have then each chosen a movie that they feel is representative or important in that area that they would like to actually talk about in greater detail for a couple minutes. And they've also identified some that perhaps are maybe not worth an entire couple minutes, but are something that we could spend a little bit of time briefly mentioning in passing as representative or important to the history and the narrative of superhero cinema. So with that, we are going to jump right in. You Believe a Man Can Fly. Superman, the movie, 1978.
That's us.
Yeah. So I feel like
Most excellent pre-'80s.
right.
Yeah. Pre-'80s and post-'80s today. We're going all over the place.
That's right.
Superman was really the bar to kind of get over. Like in terms of I felt like all the superhero movies, it felt like Superman, and then like not until like Spider-Man or I guess Batman counts.
Batman, yeah.
That's all I'm saying. Hold on there.
Yeah. So there was just a few because a lot of people for a long time said there was like a superhero movie curse. Like a good superhero movie couldn't be done
Because of the ridiculousness of the costume.
Yeah, and I felt like Superman was the one in my mind that was a great movie and also a great superhero movie.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, that's
So when you rewatched it, what stood out to you as still being great?
Well, so Richard Donner, I feel like he's got a good handle on making. I mean, again, it's very dated. The effects, are not up to what we expect. But he focuses on the people.
Yeah.
On the humans and what they want. I feel like this is the most charismatic Superman we've ever seen.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, Christopher Reeve is so great.
Yeah.
He's just so cute and great and like pure.
Yeah, I
love
mean,
him.
I feel like you could cut out like 15 minutes of the movie, like all the visual effects.
At least,
well,
yeah.
no, like if you cut out all the visual effects from the movie where he's being Superman, like it would still be a good movie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I get what you're
as in like there's still
The human element is still compelling.
Yeah.
What struck me when I rewatched this, and I was obsessed with these movies as a kid, not just this one, but all of the ones that came after, no matter how bad they got, the worse they got, the more I liked them. I think Superman 3 is possibly my favorite.
You fed off of it
I
like
can't
Nuclear
wait for you to
Man.
revisit that one on your show.
Yeah.
I love it so much. The sound effect of the tankards of ooze in Superman 3 that heat up, woo, like it's in my mind, and it's just, I love it so much.
The robot
But, like,
lady scared me so much as a kid.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Oh, my
and
gosh.
bad Superman,
Yeah.
I had feelings about it. And that's what struck me about rewatching this was like how horny everybody is. In 1978 Superman, like
That's the 70s.
she asked him what color her underpants are, and like some of the dialogue that definitely went over my head as a kid watching as an adult. I was like, oh my god. Calm down, Lois Lane. Like,
Yeah, we really don't get any 70s superhero movies. Like as soon as superhero movies start, we're into the 80s and into I feel like the 80s are a better match of what like superhero movies are. But this is the closest we get to like a 70s superhero movie.
Yeah. I mean, he was on television for a long time. Superman was just the TV guy for the most part. Nobody thought he could make this big of a leap.
Well, it is Superman. He can leap over tall buildings
over
in a single
anything.
bound. Yeah.
Yeah, if we're talking about evolution, like look how jacked you're expected to be now as a superhero.
So it's a slide of Henry Cavill's Superman next to Christopher Reeve's Superman, and like Christopher Reeve refused to wear any like padding in his suit. And like obviously Henry Cavill has some padding somewhere. But like we've all seen Henry Cavill, like that man is jacked. Like who knew that you could have that many abs?
Yeah,
It's beyond a six pack.
and of course Christopher Reeves looks like a normal person, but again, like I'll never look that good. It's
I mean,
still,
no, he looks great.
Like,
He looks
like
very
he
strong.
still looks like a physically fit person, but now like the expectation is that they look like they've been attacked by like a swarm of bees and they're swollen everywhere.
Well, in terms of the comics, I don't want to get too far off of it because I know we're sticking to movies, but there was a big debate after sort of Superman came out, is it Clark Kent pretending to be Superman, or is he always Superman pretending to be Clark Kent? So at this point, he's Clark Kent. He's a human, he's a guy, and he can also do this stuff. By the time we get to where we have Man of Steel, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
He's an
Yeah,
alien,
right.
and they emphasize the alienness of him, and that he's putting on a suit, like pretending to be a human being. And I think that's a very different feeling in the movies, because there's a lot of heart in Superman 78, and that there really isn't in Man of Steel.
Yeah.
Go.
Well, and also I think that a big thing about it is that they made Superman for everybody. It wasn't just a kids movie. And the TV shows, like, I mean, I think superhero stories really were largely relegated to kids and comics, and they weren't thought of as something for the whole family. And so I think that's something that they really did with this 1978 Superman, is they said it's a story for everybody, and it's a really interesting story.
And it's about real estate.
It's about real estate. And they made him look
Lex
normal.
Luthor in a power suit. It's Lex Luthor trying to get land.
Right.
And like you're talking about the adult content too. Like it's really a pretty adult story in terms of that. Even though we still see Superman saving people and lifting a helicopter.
Right.
Which is an interesting transition to the next movie that we have on the list here, Flash Gordon, which is very much not an everyman kind of story, much more of a sci-fi, and we have Road to Infinity Wars.
Yes, that's me. So, all right, to talk about Flash Gordon, we have to go back in time a little bit to talk about Dino De Laurentiis. Now, Dino De Laurentiis was an Italian producer who got super powerful in Hollywood. At this point, he had produced Barbarella and Serpico and Death Wish. He was like box office Midas at this point, so he could kind of do what he wanted. So, in about 1974, I couldn't find the exact date, he had a meeting with a young filmmaker who had made a movie, and the guy was super excited about making a Flash Gordon movie, had all these great ideas, and De Laurentiis said, "You've made one teen comedy, why should I ever listen to you?" and just sent him on his way. So that guy took his ideas, revamped them a little bit, and created Star Wars. So De Laurentiis was stinging from this, so that he had a chance, because if you watch any of the Flash Gordon serials and you watch Star Wars, you can see there is a very clear line of like the adventure and like what's next, like the serialization of it. So he wanted his own Star Wars. So I know this is about superhero cinema, but Star Wars casts a long shadow over all of this stuff, because everyone was chasing Star Wars. Everyone wanted to have that thing that kids and adults and everyone loved. So he wanted to make Flash Gordon his Star Wars. So he put together this thing. And now Flash Gordon was not really that well known of a property, so it's not like Superman, where like you can go to Indonesia and there's kids running around in Superman outfits. Like Flash Gordon was at this point was a comic strip. That's what everyone knew it as. It was sort of like not the thing you would think would reach everyone, and it didn't.
I've never seen it.
The story behind the scenes of this is just fantastic. We could do a whole hour just about all the machinations that happen behind the scene. But like some of the highlights I found were they got a real smart script, and the other just went, no, I want it ridiculous. I want it comic booky. So he hired a guy who worked on Batman '66, like the Adam West Batman, and that's what he wanted. And that the guy then, because has barely spoken English, that had to be translated by someone into Italian, and then once it was approved, it had to be translated back into English, which explains a lot when you watch the movie, because almost nothing makes sense. So when they shot it, and mostly in Italy with an Italian crew, who none of them spoke English, so the director could talk to the cast and the cast director, and no one could talk to the crew at all. They had to have translators for everything. But through it all, the thing that amazed me most watching it again, especially in high definition, is the costumes are amazing.
Yay.
Like they went all out. Like I had to pause on my HD screen. Yeah, that's a humble brag. And because you see Ming's collar and his chest plate are all covered and they're all shiny. And I realized they're made up of thousands of beads. Like they stitch together every single one of these things. There's no in the picture we're showing on there. It's very much like a spandex looking thing, but inside every little piece is all hand stitched. There must have been 100 Italian sewers out there just frantically working on these costumes. It's terrible. Like, I mean, it's like you watch it again and it makes no sense at all. Mostly because this is like the personification of white privilege. Like, their Flash Gordon is such a lunk. There's nothing to him. He has no charisma, no charm, no military ability. Like, he shows up and they're all like, you need to lead a revolution. Why? Like, he has, like,
because he's not
stronger, he's not faster, he's not smarter. He's just the blonde-haired, blue-eyed white guy that showed up. And so they're like, well, you're the guy.
Yeah. At least like in the serial, he was like a pilot, and he was like like a military hero, and then he had a scientist friend and like a reporter girlfriend, and they were like a team, and they knew what they were doing. And then we have like a football player who seems like he's lost.
Not even a great one. Like, he's not supposed to be Joe Montana. Like, he's like, I mean, he's like third string. I mean, like, there's
he
really
gets to fly in his own plane. He's like a private jet.
Sure, yeah, sure. Well, he's still in the NFL, so he still gets perks. Right. So yeah, he's not like a kicker. But it's
sports ball reference.
Yeah, come to me for the sports ball references.
There's our sports reference for the day.
Yeah, no, I have no idea what I'm talking about. I say third string just because I've heard someone say it. But you can see a lot of where it came to. Like, did anyone take any inspiration from this? Not really. But you can see the level of craftsmanship in terms of, like, they built real sets. Like, as opposed to now, like, you watch episode 1 and it's like it's them walking on green screens, and you can tell the difference between them running down a hallway in Flash Gordon, where they built a real hallway and they built a giant disc for them to fight on top of that apparently was so newly finished that when the actors fell on it, they had to stop production to get the silver paint off of them because it was still wet. But the production design, you can see, like, I was looking at some of the characters, and they look like characters that come out of Canto Bight.
Canto
Bight from Last Jedi, or the Sovereign from Guardians of the Galaxy 2. It's that same sort of completely ridiculous, over the top, overly dressed, rich, a-holes that are surrounding them all. It's clear that the people had watched it too. But boy, yeah, it was such. I mean, like, John Carter, which doesn't get a lot of love, did this story so much better. And yeah, this is one because it's got 2 great Queen songs in it. It sort of endures. But yeah,
so would you say that maybe like a theme of these early superhero movies is that they're still kind of grasping on how to adapt a comic book?
Yeah, I would definitely say. I mean, that they found with Superman, they sort of went for casting Christopher Reeve. I think was the best thing they ever did because he has so much natural charisma, and you just like him. Like, nobody likes Flash. Like,
get out of here, Flash.
I know offense to Sam Jones, who was first admitted it was not his finest performance ever, but they picked him from the. Oh, this is another piece of trivia that I forgot about. So they couldn't find anybody to be Flash. They went to Kurt Russell. Kurt Russell read the script and went, yeah, no. Kurt Russell, he's like, he went off to do The Thing. So I think he made a better career choice. Yeah. They went to Arnold Schwarzenegger auditioned for it, and no one could understand what he was saying. So, like, no. So they got Sam Jones off of The Dating Game. He was a contestant, and they were watching it on TV. They're like, that's my guy. That's as close to my offensive Italian accent.
Was that your Dino?
That's my Dino. Yeah, that's the. So I think it came down to a lot of it was casting. So it's like if they had Christopher Reeve playing Flash Gordon, it might have been a very different movie.
Yeah, but
it sounds like the important thing with this one was the costuming. And so moving on, because we've got to get through a bunch more films. Let's talk for a moment briefly about Swamp Thing, and then we can move on to Supergirl.
I just think Swamp Thing, I think it fits in exactly with what we were just saying, in that they were still trying to figure out how to adapt these comic books, these properties. I mean, they had Wes Craven directing it, and they tried to go a little bit with his horror route and everything, but it really, I don't know, it's an interesting film to revisit. I rewatched it for this, and but it really is lacking. Yeah. It's not a great film, and it's not. I mean, I think if they had, I'm not as familiar with Swamp Thing other than I think a couple issues of it, but I feel like if they let Wes Craven really go the horror route, they could have done something interesting with it. But I think that it just fails on that part otherwise.
I think there's a place for it.
Not like a monster in the, like, Frankenstein Wolfman?
At this point, pretty much.
Yes.
Like,
okay.
This is before
right about the time
Alan Moore took over the comic, and he made him into like a plant elemental, and so he became really spiritual and stuff, and super popular.
And Ellen
He
Morris.
found Jesus.
No idea.
More like he became Jesus. But I think that there is a place for a low-budget superhero movie, though. I kind of wish that every superhero movie wasn't $100 million. Like this was a low-budget, nothing kind of thing. I think for not necessarily for Swamp Thing, but for these characters, you can make a dirty $10 million movie and have it be great. I wish they would sort of do that now.
Mm-hmm.
So how did we get from Swamp Thing to Supergirl and things like Howard the Duck?
Oh, Howard.
Oh, Howard.
Because we have those briefly mentioned as well, we're going to spend a little bit of time with Howard.
If we
the
just
Duck.
trusted George Lucas and let him do whatever he wants.
This was
right.
at the height of like whatever George wanted, George got, and that's what he wanted.
Yeah, Howard the Duck was, and this is an interesting one because it actually had been around for quite a while. I mean, George Lucas, found the comic shortly after he did American Graffiti, and he talked to Willard Huyck and Gloria Katz, who wrote that with him, and was like, oh, this would be a fun little thing to make. And over the next 10 years or so, they kind of came up with a plan, and they made this kind of mess of a movie. And what's interesting is that they actually initially wanted to do it animated. And I think if maybe they had stuck with kind of the character a little closer, it would have been better. But they had a deal with Universal, and Universal required it to be a live action movie that they made. And George Lucas was like, oh, I've got this special effects company. We'll do this duck and it'll be great. And they spent a lot of time trying to get this duck right, and they never did. And it just was this disastrous thing, and nobody ever bought into this duck. It's just a terrible costume from beginning to end, and it's a terrible script. And the problem is, and interestingly, I thought this movie was actually a bomb. It actually barely made its money back in the box office, which was a little bit of a surprise. But the writers, they didn't even, and I think this goes to kind of what we were saying, this whole idea of trying to figure out how they're going to translate a comic book property into a film. Huyck and Katz's first inclination with it was to kind of remove like all the kind of rude and obnoxious stuff that kind of makes Howard the Duck who he is. Mm-hmm. And also their version of it, this is what Gloria Katz said. She said, it's a film about a duck from outer space. It's not supposed to be an existential experience. We're supposed to have fun with this concept, but for some reason, reviewers weren't able to get over that problem, blaming it on everyone else. Steve Gerber is the one who came up with the character. And he said his view of the character is that it's a kind of this cosmic, he calls it, this is no joke. There it is, the cosmic giggle, the funniest gag in the universe. That life's most serious moments and most incredibly dumb moments are often distinguishable only by a momentary point of view. Anyone who doesn't believe this probably cannot enjoy reading the Howard the Duck. His point of view on kind of the absurdity of it all is kind of what makes Howard the Duck what Howard the Duck is. And I don't think Huyck and Katz ever figured that out, and that I think is the biggest problem with it. Plus that awful costume.
Yeah.
So,
and you're talking about adult content in Superman. The adult content in this is so creepy.
my
oh God, it's like the 80s, what they could get away with in PG movies sometimes. Let's paint this lady white and make her look like a duck and put her in a bathtub, and we can have a nude scene now. It's like what?
Nope.
Oh,
Yeah.
terrible movie. Oh.
That's why we're all so well adjusted now as adults.
Not to mention the animal love that we get with
Right?
Leah Thompson and Howard. Yeah. Marvel's first film, and a bit of a disaster right out of the gate.
But, memorable theme song. So.
I was tempted to bring it.
Right?
Yeah,
I
but
know.
I couldn't find it on iTunes.
Oh,
I was
yes.
like, well,
but you wouldn't want to.
no, I could probably find it on YouTube, but yeah, again, I wouldn't want to.
So how does that compare to some of like the darker themes that you see in the 1989 Punisher, or even Batman, which
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. Punisher is interesting because it's the first one that's really true to the character. I mean, like they were afraid of the costume, so it wasn't like so he never wears the skull in the whole thing. But Dolph Lundgren I thought did a pretty decent job as being like. But basically, they made Death Wish again.
Well, it's like if the Punisher doesn't have a costume, then he's just like a really angry dude.
Right.
Like,
Yeah. With a guy, angry white guy with a gun.
I know.
That always goes well.
Oh, more of those stories,
Yeah, I know.
please.
And that was another dark one. But then they also were like, oh, but it's a comic book, so we still have to have kids. And then they had the whole like rescue the kids story. And it's like, what is this
He has
happening?
to be a hero.
Meanwhile, the kids are like, leave us out of this. We don't.
We don't want to be in your
I think
terrible
it was
movie, Dolph.
PG-13, wasn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
like saving these kids, and then like, I don't
It's
know.
just groping for an audience. Like there's not a built-in comic book movie audience yet, and so they're taking like properties that were cheap but like adult themed and trying to then it's like, oh, it's a comic book, we'll give it to kids.
Well,
or
and-
they're making like things really dumb.
Yeah, well, and I think the Punisher is an example where they really took Dolph Lundgren as the property and
Yeah,
said,
very true.
here's an action star. Let's find a comic book that we can kind of inject into his type of movie, and that's really all they did with that one.
Yeah.
Unlike Batman, which came out same year, and this is one where it had been kind of the story had always been kind of dark, but because of kind of the really campy TV show from the 60s and some of the campier comic book storylines and everything, it had kind of gotten lost, and Batman was a bit of a joke. And it took producers Michael Uslan and Benjamin Melniker they actually bought the rights to it in 1979, and then it took them 10 years to actually get somebody interested in making a darker comic story. I think people were still going, oh, but we want it to be like Superman. We want it to be bright. It's for the kids and everything. And they finally got people to bite into this thing with this darker presence of this dark character. And I think getting Tim Burton at the helm of it and Michael Keaton, as much as it was controversial at the time, Batmania was crazy in 1989, but people were still arguing that Michael Keaton was a terrible choice. He's this comedian. He's this guy who just played Beetlejuice.
Yeah.
Exactly. Nobody wanted to see him in the movie. But then you release it, and I mean, this movie became the number one box office opener for its opening weekend. It was the fastest film to earn $100 million in just 11 days.
Oh, yeah.
The good old days.
I still remember it being a phenomenon.
Yeah,
like
it was
It was huge. It was.
yeah.
And it was like Batman summer. Like
Yes.
everything.
Oh, yeah. We all had the
that whole
shirts
summer.
and we got the cups from McDonald's.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it was a media blitz.
It was.
so
still
good.
have my movie stub from it.
Aw, that's so sweet.
He is framed on his wall.
But it's like Tim Burton and Michael Keaton both have that like dark playfulness, right? Where they can
Yeah.
do something that's really like creepy and so dark and it's like meaning and origins, but it's still playful and like joyful and in its oddity amusing. So I think they were a great team.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously they had worked together before with Beetlejuice, so they already had that chemistry. And then they brought it again to Batman Returns. Regardless of what you think of it, they still had their partnership and their chemistry and everything.
Yeah.
And so it was a good team. What I think is funny, this is just a side note, in the process of trying to get this film made, Uslan and Melniker actually had a lot of different directors and people attached. And at one point they were talking to Ivan Reitman to direct it, who wanted Bill Murray to be Batman and Eddie Murphy to play Robin.
Oh my God.
Yeah. That got pretty far,
Again,
too.
falling back into the campy territory.
That's right.
Yeah.
That would have been a very different movie.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine what that
Like the
movie would
most
look like.
casual Batman and the most like high energy Robin.
Yeah, this really, I mean, Batman obviously has been around since, for 75 years or more at this point. But he had been a joke before. Now to bring him, make him serious, now he is sort of like a thumbprint on the media landscape. I mean, like it's always, the question is always, who is Batman now? I mean, like as we're recording this, we're between Batman. There's sort of a new Batman that they say is coming.
Robert Pattinson.
Yeah, Robert Pattinson, that's right. So, but that's news. Like, when is that movie coming out? Nobody knows, but we're already talking about who the next Batman is.
People are already starting their own new letter writing campaign to oust him.
Exactly, yeah. It's already stirring it up and hasn't even been officially announced.
Some things never change.
To rewatch this, it's clear that Tim Burton is not a comic book fan. And he's even said, he's gone on record saying, I've never read a comic book story in my life. I don't do a Tim Burton impression, sorry. But Batman in the movie is a straight up murderer. Like, there's that whole question of like, does Batman kill? Well, he has
This one
machine guns in his car, and he drives into a building and drops a bomb. So yeah, he straight up murders dudes in this. And like, 10-year-old me watching it going like, oh, it's just Batman. This is is great. But now you watch it
right.
with these eyes and go, oh, like he's like the Punisher. He's killing
Really?
people. Okay.
Yeah.
But they were really bad people.
They were bad people,
Yeah.
so it's okay. When they're in thug costumes, it's okay.
It is.
Exactly.
But even though it diverged from the source in quite a number of ways, it definitely, because of its success, had a huge impact over the next era of comic book films.
Yes, absolutely.
Everything else that came after it is, as you all put it, in the shadow of the bat.
Yeah,
That's
so
right.
before they were just kind of groping for cheap properties. It's like Superman was big, but there weren't a lot of replicators. But once Batman came out and became massive, then everyone was trying to make their Batman. Now, finally, there was now an audience for these comic book movies.
And they looked for that as the template because things are about to get dark. Cinematically.
Yep.
Like there's
Literally and figuratively.
That's right, because Ninja Turtles is our and it's
One of the first
Well, that's
ones in
right. And so
1990s
most of the
to
scenes
make
take
Ninja
place at night in the dark, just like in Batman.
Literally dark,
The
but
sun
yes.
never shines in Gotham.
But it was a Jim Henson one. And, this is one where I think they were trying to figure out how dark do we go with these comic book movies? Because they kind of, the comics arguably were a little darker.
Yeah, I was a fan of them, and
yes.
there
Really
was a
light.
lot of blood. It was definitely lethal,
Yeah.
for sure.
Right. A very different change.
Because that was a reflection off of the Daredevil comics, which were the popular time. They were sort of a reflection of that, and then they became radical dude.
So then how did we get from that to a movie like The Rocketeer in 91?
Okay, The Rocketeer is on my thing 'cause it's one of my favorite movies of all time, and it so does not belong anywhere exactly where it is. So I think it's a terrific movie that completely gets misunderstood a lot. So now this is my gimmick. So to talk about the Rocketeer, 1991, when you talk about Disney and coming out of the 80s and 90s, they were ice cold. Like, we think of Disney now as the predominant media company, everything. They own Star Wars. They are the hottest thing. Whatever they put out, even if it's terrible, they're going to make it like Dumbo. Actually, I have not seen some. Dumbo comes out, gets lukewarm receptions, still makes $100 million. Like they're such a cultural juggernaut. But that was not the case in the late 80s into the 90s. They could not find a hit to save their lives. They were struggling.
live action.
Live action, especially live action, yeah. So, Little Mermaid had just come out, so their animation studio had been shut down. They came out with Little Mermaid, it took a long shot, and it became huge, and suddenly they could make animated movies again, and so that was the thing. But this was the time that they were animating themselves, and so it was every 2 or usually 3 years before another one coming out. So Beauty and the Beast was still on the horizon. Like, it wasn't even, like, they were barely talking about it. So they had Little Mermaid, and then if you look through their slate of live action movies from like 75 to 91, you'll be shocked because you've never heard of any of those movies. I mean, Disney has buried them because they were huge disasters. They were consistently putting out 2 live action movies a year, and nobody was going to them. And this is also the time that for Euro Disney was sucking all the money out of their pockets too. So they finally got a hit, and it was called Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Yay.
And it was not only was it a legitimately great movie, but it was a success for them, and they had no idea what to do. Like, we've never had a live action success in so long, and so they were trying to figure out how to capitalize on it. And they still really didn't. They tried to sequelize and everything else. And it's been awful. But
We got a remake coming out soon.
and a remake is coming, yeah. I think for the Disney Plus. I think that's where it's going. Well, we'll see. So they went, all right, so that guy who directed that movie clearly knows what he's doing, so let's let him do what he wants to do. And what he wanted to do was an adaptation of one of his favorite comic books, and that was The Rocketeer. And so they sort of went, okay, if you think that'll do it. So he made a brilliant 1930s action movie right up there with 1999's The Mummy and Raiders of the Lost Ark. It fits right into that thing. And audiences did not want that at all, like not from Disney especially.
They wanted dark.
That's right, because that's the thing. This is the right movie at the wrong time. Coming in the shadow of the bat, coming after Ninja Turtles. Like, this did not find its audience. It was a huge bomb, which is it's heartbreaking because it's such a brilliant, funny, sweet movie, and the effects still hold up. I mean, like, we're talking about some of the effects in Superman are laughably bad at this point. Even but the flying stuff still works, and even in Rocketeer, the flying stuff still works. You can see how they did a lot of it.
I believed a man could fly.
Yes, yeah, and still they can. 10 plus years later, I still believe he can fly.
You'd mount a campaign to bring this movie back.
I really think it is.
Status.
If they drop this now, I think it would be huge. But what interesting? So these things all come back around. So this movie is a disaster. It gets buried. It gets put away. Disney it disacknowledges its existence, and then the Marvel Cinematic Universe shows up, and they suddenly they're like, oh yeah, Captain America stories, and we need like a World War II action thing, and they call up the director, Joe Johnson. They call up the director of The Rocketeer and said, hey, you know how to do this, and he does, and he makes Captain America the first Avenger, and it's brilliant, and everybody loves it, and I was like, this is the same thing. Like he did it again. Like if you like this, go watch The Rocketeer. You're gonna love it.
I wonder if it would have done well if it had been released 10 years earlier in the Superman era,
I think
before
so.
the darkness kind of took over.
Even though the effects probably would have been a lot cruder, I think that because this is it's bright and it's sunny, and he's a terrible at his job. I mean, like as a hero, he does not know what he's doing. He makes mistakes all the way along. Which coming off of Batman, which is what everyone is, he is so self-assured and never questions up and always knows what he's doing. Rocketeer, like the picture we have up here is him flying along. That picture is when he salutes a kid that he's flying next to and shuts off his rocket pack and plummets to Earth and barely gets it turned back on again and saves himself. Oops. Like it happens all through the movie. He makes these rookie mistakes because he doesn't know what he's doing. So he's not Indiana Jones. He's not Bruce Wayne. He's just a guy trying to figure this stuff out, and that's what makes it great.
He's like Iron Man, Tony trying to figure out the Mark II.
Yeah.
For the whole movie.
In the minutes that I watched with you, that's exactly what it is. Like that period of time, him figuring it out. That's the whole movie. I just love it.
And it seems pretty different from the darkness of the Batman.
Which is what the audience wanted.
And what some of the rest of the 90s brought us. It was this mix of weird and wacky and bright and dark, and even some animated films, including Batman Mask of the Phantasm.
Yeah, that after the success of Batman, then comes Batman the Animated Series. Then they decided to make a movie of that, which is another huge flop. Like, and once again, and it so does not deserve it. Mask of the Phantasm is a brilliant animated movie, and is such a great piece of the Batman the Animated Series, and it just did not find an audience. And now I think it's beloved. But at the time, did you go see it when it was out?
No, not until video.
And
I was a kid who loved Batman.
Right, it came and went so fast.
Well, and I think Batman, by this point, I think they missed their mark because it was the live action Batman was cool. And now it was animated. All of a sudden, it was like, oh, that's for kids now. I'm not going to watch it because I'm already old enough to watch this stuff where it's live action.
Yeah.
It sounds like the studios really couldn't figure out what they were really looking for. I mean, then you have things like The Mask, and then you have things like The Crow, which are two very different movies that have very different audiences and very different feel and styles to them.
And released in the same year.
Yeah, so we've got like indie comics now, like like Vertigo and like these darker adult comics like The Crow, which I just rewatched this morning. This was one of those movies that I was obsessed with, like when you're a teenager.
Oh my god,
this is so much like teenage angst just running through this movie.
Oh yes, I was 13 when this movie came out, and I was all about it. Like it's dark, it's mysterious. He's got creepy black makeup. Like the story of the movie itself is tragic. There's The Cure on the soundtrack.
If you want to like revisit your youth, this is like a good movie for that because of that angsty time. But that also kind of like there's not just one type of comic book movie, like comics, it's like a diverse medium, and there's not just Superman. There's like this kind of stuff, and I feel like this, even though it wasn't like a huge hit, and it was obviously the tragedy of Jason Lee, Brandon. Brandon's dead too. Brandon Lee's death, which kind of adds to the angst and the sorrow to the whole experience.
Well, it does because everybody knew that story before the movie came out, right?
Yeah.
So I had no idea that this was based on a comic book or what any of the source material was. It was just like a slightly gothic, dark, creepy movie with that gave me an excuse to wear black vinyl and,
Right.
and a lot of eyeliner,
But yeah, I could see like the bad version of this would be someone saying it's a comic book and comic book movies should be like this.
Yes.
Whereas like there's again so many different types of stories in comics
And
that you really have to kind of create and mold it around that specific
because he's like
property.
a Punisher. That's what he is. Like he's a Punisher from beyond the grave. But as dated as I feared this movie would be, and as dated as it truly is, like it's still
It's so 90s.
watchable.
Oh yes,
but
yeah.
it's so watchable.
It is such
and
a
it's
slice of the '90s. Like everything about it is exactly right for what it is.
exactly right. And the casting, like we talked about earlier, like the casting of Brandon Lee is like he has that perfect like sensitivity beyond the dark exterior, which if you're 13, you're like, yeah, that's what I need. I need some sensitivity on the inside, but some creepy darkness and long greasy hair on the outside.
He's hurt inside, and still manifest.
I can save him.
Can you imagine like Keanu Reeves doing this? I mean, I'm sure it was
can
offered
and
to
I
him.
will, Kyle. I can.
Calm down, Chris. Calm down.
Can we get a letter writing campaign for this going on?
But I think a lot, like we were talking about, though, it really comes down to the lead.
Yeah.
I mean, especially for these, like what we have, almost everything we have is a singular hero.
Yeah.
At this point, they were not talking about teams or any of that stuff, and it comes down to that guy. And Brandon Lee was the guy. Like he was perfect in that role.
The lead and the adaptation, like the people who actually translated it, I think, understand the meat of what they're trying to do with the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then like a 90s kid unattended in fishnets and combat boots skating around on the rainy streets of the city is like, I'm like, I want to be her. I want to be best friends with the Crow and just skate around and have Ernie Hudson buy me Chinese food.
But I think it shows it too because it's a strong concept of like the revenge stuff too, and they have never been able to replicate it. They've tried.
No, The Crow 2 is terrible.
Oh, that's awful.
And it was a TV series.
And it was a TV
briefly.
series, and it was they've made 3 or 4 different direct-to-video movies too. I think David Boreanaz was in one of them.
What?
Yes, he's a villain. I think isn't he the bad? He's not the Crow. He's the. I don't remember, but they are terrible. When you get to most awful '90s podcast, when you guys do the next one, then
That's up
do a whole
next.
thing on
Yeah.
the Crow. But it shows the power of it. Like having it's that magical thing of like Stephen Norrington and Ernie Hudson too, who after Brandon couldn't finish his scenes had his part got a lot bigger, and so he had to carry a lot of the movie too.
Yeah.
They're all fantastic in that movie. It just comes together in a really weird way.
And Bai Ling is insane.
It sounds like there's a mix of the talent of the people who are involved, but also understanding the source material
Absolutely.
and understanding the audience. And it sounds like sometimes they got it, and the studios understood what they were doing, and sometimes they didn't. I forgot that the shadow even existed.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Alec Baldwin as the Shadow. And
I think he even acknowledges that was a mistake.
Oh, geez.
Judge
Dredd.
man. I could talk for the rest of the podcast about
I'm so
Judge
glad
Dredd,
we
but I'm not
have
going to.
a much
We'll go
better
ahead
version
and
of that.
skip that. There are lots of feels there.
Oh, and then
Yeah.
and
what's
you know,
next is
then you've got
there we
Tank
go.
Girl.
Oh yes,
so
Tank
good.
Girl. Oh, I love Tank Girl so much. So instead of like talking about the sort of where we're at in terms of the studios and behind the scenes stuff, let's talk about women for once because like since
Yay!
Supergirl came out and was a terrible movie, then Hollywood said, well, then clearly women can't be heroes, and so then so for the rest of this time you've not seen one woman up on the
It's
screen.
proven.
So this one they finally they found this really weird independent comic. Once again, no Marvel, no DC. This is all on its own, Tank Girl, and then do it. And so this is a movie directed by a woman. This is the production designer was a woman, female lead. Like it is girl power before girl power. Actually, right about the time. Yeah, I say 95. That's
And
Spice
all
Girl
the
time.
dudes are kangaroos.
And all the
Take
dudes are kangaroos.
that.
Yes, this is a movie where Lori Petty has sex with a mutant kangaroo. Like, how is this not a gigantic hit? I don't understand. Ice-T is in this movie as a mutant kangaroo. Like, even so, people have tried to come after him about that. Like saying that he's like, man, I got paid so much for that movie. He's like, I'm not ashamed of it at all. Like he is proud of the work he did. Malcolm McDowell was right after Star Trek Generations, as cast him as the villain. It was unbelievable. So Rachel Talalay is the one who directed it. She had worked for John Waters. So if you watch John Waters movies and then you watch this, you can kind of see, oh yeah, clearly it's the same aesthetic. She's gone on to direct episodes of Doctor Who. Heaven Sent and Hellbent. She directed Twice Upon a Time. The director designer was Catherine Hardwicke. who has directed Lords of Dogtown in 13.
Mm-hmm.
Lori Petty is amazing. She was coming off of League of Their Own and Free Willy. And I've actually met. So how much do I love this movie? I have one poster at my house, one movie poster hanging up, and it is Tank Girl, and it is signed by Lori Petty.
No way!
It is my pride and joy. Naomi Watts is also in this movie as her first performance. She unfortunately does not like to talk about it. But coming into this, I know it comes out now and it's sort of seen as this weird offbeat thing, but going into it, everybody was really, really excited about what it could be. So much so that they went to Stan Winston to create the Rippers, the mutant kangaroos. And Stan Winston was white hot at this time. He was doing Jurassic Park. He did Terminator. He did Predator, all these designs. And he said, I want to make the mutant kangaroos for this. And they're like, we're a tiny little movie that's going to shoot in Australia. Like, we have no money. And he said, all right, I'll do it for half. And so he basically he had no reason to, but he wanted to do it so badly. He slashed his budget, made the costumes for it, and they are still on display in his museum. He asked for them to be put right next to the Predator and the Alien. Like, he was so proud of it. It's terrible because the studio wanted a very traditional story, and Tank Girl is not a traditional story at all. I don't know how they looked at the script of mutant kangaroos and and like, there's even one deleted scene with a room of dildos, and they went, no, all this has to go. And they took it from the director and tried to cut it into a linear, direct storyline, and also slash the budget at the same time. And it really does not hold. But you can see the spirit still living on in it. It has such a great heart, and it's funny, and it's weird, and it's exciting. They took all the stuff they couldn't do and embraced it. There was a major action sequence going to happen with, like, there's tanks and there's jets all flying around doing all of these things. And the studio said, yeah, we're not going to pay for any of that. So they went to an animation studio, and they had the animation studio create the entire sequence. So the movie's going along, and all of a sudden it just switches, and it's this brilliant graffiti pop art animation battle scene that happens, and then they, like, at the end they all walk out of it like, yeah, that's what just happened.
That's what happened.
It's so awesome. And so I called it the awesome apocalypse, because this is like post-apocalyptic, but everyone thinks everything is cool and everything's awesome, and you can see that stuff in, like, Sunset Overdrive and Rage 2 and Far Cry New Dawn, where instead of having everything be brown and gray like Mad Max, you have this explosion of, like, anything that's color, everybody wants it because that's the only color you get to see is what you find.
And I like something that you said there. It's this idea of it being the heart and soul, and having this, you can feel that movie had something special. They didn't pull it off right.
Yeah.
But it had something to start with, which actually takes us kind of to the next era that we're talking about, era number 3. I make this look good, where we take the excitement of the 90s and the things they tried to do, and we turn it into something that's actually good.
We don't get to talk about the Phantom.
Nope.
We'll skip the Phantom.
Wow.
And I don't know that it started out with
No, but this is still the grim and gritty. This is the Crow influence. This is the dark, serious, brooding.
Yeah, because they can't make bright spandex look good yet.
No. Yeah, we're still in the black leather phase, and we will be for probably the next next number of years.
Yeah, probably until X-Men.
Yeah, X-Men are still in black leather. Yeah, they don't even do, like, a full costume for a while.
It's like the yellow X, right? And that's it.
Yeah, that's right. Subtle. You know.
But we go from Spawn to movies like Steel.
Steel.
Dear.
Yes.
7.
So Steel, I just as a side thing of Steel, I know.
Let's not talk about Steel.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I love the fact that they decided to make a spin-off of Superman, which is what Steel is. Steel was a character in the comics that was a guy who was inspired, John Henry Irons, for those of you who are paying attention. He was so inspired by Superman, he made a super suit and became Steel. So they decided to make a Steel movie starring Shaq, which, sure, box office gold, because Kazam, and strip it of all connection to Superman. Like, he's just a guy who puts on a suit. There's no mention of Superman at all. He's just like, he's basically an Iron Man before Iron Man, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's awful.
And we go from that to something like Men in Black.
Yeah, I feel like I'm dominating now because this is mine as well. So
Then make it brief.
Yeah, this is exactly what's hard. So Men in Black is it's easy to be brief on it because it's just a perfect movie.
It's so good.
I love Men in Black so much, and I watched it again even with a critical eye, and it's just brilliant. Like everything. This is the weird alchemy of Hollywood. Everyone coming into this movie are at their peak. Like you have, like Tommy Lee Jones is right off of The Fugitive, and Will Smith is right off of Independence Day, and Barry Sonnenfeld is right off of the Addams Family movies, and you get you have Ed Solomon who had created Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. You have Bo Welch who had just worked with Danny Elfman on all his stuff. Barry Welch and Danny Elfman who had just worked with Tim Burton on all of his stuff. And Rick Baker, who's like a special effects legend. All of them are at the peak of their talents, and they all come together. And Steven Spielberg shepherds the whole thing. Yep. Oh my God! This is the Avengers of movies. Like these are, and everybody is coming in at the absolute peak, and instead of it completely imploding, it creates a fantastic movie. Now, behind the scenes, apparently it was a mess. Like they were running around everywhere, and the scripts changed dramatically, and they reshot. They actually end up almost reshooting the movie in editing. They eliminated an entire alien race. They changed dialogue. They did all this stuff, but it still works. Like all of it works. Everybody is funny and interesting. The world is believable. There is real heart and real emotions. And I'll just do one of my favorite scenes in this as a writer. That lit up my brain is that. There's a scene where they're at the farmhouse where you hear an argument going on between the husband and his wife, just about how terrible everything is. And it's all done in one shot, and you see a light starting in the sky come down, and it turns out to be an alien ship. And so he's complaining about everything that's going on, saying, like, the only thing that works around here is my truck, as the alien ship smashes into his truck and destroys it. And he steps out. Now, anyone who's a writer, at that point, the typical thing would be, oh, I can't believe, oh no, why would it? Like this huge reaction. But instead, he walks out, opens the door, looks at the destroyed truck and goes, figures. It's just like this, oh my God, like I remember in the theater, just like it lighting up my brain, like, oh, we're going a whole different direction. Like you never know where this movie is going to go because it has a completely different rhythm to anything else.
And it sounds like they finally got to a point where
they actually elevated the source material.
They understood
it's better than
their
the comic.
Audience and are willing, as a studio, to meet the audience where they are. Because at the same time we have something like that, we also have movies like Blade, which is
first great Marvel action.
Dark
right.
Gritty and completely different.
Yeah, it's its own thing. It's its own movie.
And honoring its source material.
Yeah.
And then comedy movies like Mystery Men.
Yeah, the team. We finally have a team.
Oh my God. I loved this movie when it came out in 1999. Like, I was all about Ben Stiller, Hank Azaria, Janine Garofalo. Eddie Izzard is in this movie. Greg Kinnear, like William H. Macy.
The Blue Raja.
Paul Rubens. Just like on paper, it looks so good. And I watched this movie, and it's garbage. It is straight trash. There's nothing good about this movie.
Wow.
Nothing
Frankenstein.
It is so bad. Like, it's so sexist and like casually racist, and the jokes are so homophobic, and it's so bad.
But then just a year later, we've got X-Men, which I feel like, in my mind, is the movie that kind of broke we're talking about like comic book movies and superhero movies, but I feel like X-Men was the first one to kind of dispel the curse of the superhero movie.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it really was.
Like, Mystery Man is supposed to be a spoof of superhero movies that don't even actually exist yet.
That's right. Yeah, that was.
It's spoofing the Avengers before there is an Avengers. Yeah. It's spoofing the X-Men before there is an X-Men.
Yeah, it made sense as a comic because there were plenty of comics with teams.
Movie-wise.
But by this point, nobody had seen a team in a comic that really was a successful film. And so you're getting this kind of comedy spoof of these team, superheroes, but nobody really connected that with anything. Yeah. But yeah, then X-Men comes out, and I mean, it really does kind of change the face of things because now you've got a team. They're building this whole team. It's about these mutants coming together and creating these teams and battling, and it's something that really kind of they did right. Bryan Singer.
Yeah, they're wearing their
gravitated to it.
superpowers like on their sleeves.
Yeah,
Like, everyone
exactly.
was like overtly superhero.
Yeah, exactly. That's their one thing that they do, and they do it well. And plus, it had a message, and I think that's something that Bryan Singer obviously gravitated to. But also, I think that is something that helps X-Men resonate, and I think it helped resonate with audiences too. That whole idea of people being prejudiced because there's something different about you, but it doesn't mean that you are different. And the way that message played out in the film, I think it made it a very strong film. It was huge at the box office, and that really is something that kind of grew this film to be a huge thing and allowed for us to kind of get to the place where we are now, where you have things like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you have the DC universe, all these different universes that people are creating because people, took a couple decades to figure it all out.
And we even have some unique universes, things like Unbreakable, which didn't necessarily know it was going to be a universe, or we didn't know it was going to be a universe when it first came out.
That was a stealth comic.
Nor was
movie.
it based on anything.
Yeah, they didn't,
it was almost like the first meta kind of look at
nobody.
comics.
Yeah, like he did not tell anybody. Like when nobody knew going in what it was that it was going to be a comic book movie.
And as you've already mentioned, you do have things like X-Men that came out around the same period of time. It's kind of funny to think about all these movies that came out right around the same period of time.
And like the year after The
because
Matrix.
They were all different at different times. So is there any more you wanted to say about X-Men? We do have a couple minutes here if you'd like.
I mean, it was just another, like Batman, like Superman, this was another huge hit at the box office. And I think it speaks to the fact that this is what people were ready for. They were ready for this transition. And I mean, it was a huge opening weekend. It was the highest grossing opening weekend for a superhero film, beating Batman Forever. The sixth biggest opening of all time. And it was just a big film. And obviously it allowed Bryan Singer, another persona non grata these days, to continue making more of these and to tell more of these stories before
the power of X-Men too is casting. I mean, most of the people going into this were, we had Patrick Stewart, who we loved, but no one knew who Ian McKellen was. This was before Lord of the Rings.
And the big surprise with that one was Hugh Jackman coming in as Wolverine, because it originally was Doug Ray Scott who was supposed to be Wolverine, but he had to back out because he got injured on the set of Mission Impossible 2, and so he couldn't do it.
From
and then
motorcycles.
They were already jumping around motorcycle stunts. They were already in production on X-Men, and they were kind of panicking. And Bryan Singer wanted Russell Crowe to be in it, and he didn't think that he was the right choice. But he said, "Hey, I've got this buddy down under, Hugh Jackman. Why don't you give him a try?" And Hugh Jackman, he didn't have as much experience, but he read for the part, and he was perfect. And
He's perfect.
now, I can't even imagine them doing this movie without him. And I think I mean, you mentioned casting. That I think is another thing that makes all of these, like the ones that succeed, they find the right people to be a part of it and make the team. I mean, even in universes like Harry Potter, it's because they cast it right that you really end up being able to create that universe.
X-Men and X2 are like star-making machines. Like everybody in that group has gone on to do amazing stuff, and almost all of them are still working.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right.
And even with like the X-Men origin stuff, like with that cast has just exploded. Jennifer Lawrence, just a small part in that, and now they have to base every movie around her.
J-Law, yes.
You can see from X-Men. Then we have the building blocks that they will use to make the MCU.
Yeah,
and all the stuff that comes after,
which is the precursor to all the things that we know and love. So I believe that takes us to the end today. So thank you all for your time today, and thank you all for hanging out with us for an hour. We loved having you today. Real quick, one last thing. If you like what we're talking about, if you liked hearing these people, they do have podcasts. They run on a regular basis. You've got the Marvel Movie Minute, taking on the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time, now playing Iron Man.
Yeah.
That's right. We're cranking through the Marvel movies, and next up we'll be talking about The Incredible Hulk 1 minute at a time.
Awesome. Yeah. We also have the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast. It's a podcast where filmmaker Nathan Blackwell of Squishy Studios and a comedian, Chrissy Lentz of National Comedy Theater, take a hilarious look at the 80s movies we love, hate to love, and love to hate with 2018 eyes and probably a significant haze of nostalgia.
Word.
Well said.
And Road to Infinity. In January of 2018, the members of Legible Scroll came up with a mad plan: watch a Marvel movie a week leading up to Infinity War and put out a podcast about each one. And we did it. But little did we know the story wouldn't be completed until Endgame. Or after.
Yeah. So thank you to Phoenix Fan Fusion for letting us do our panel together. That was very cool of them. This was a lot of fun. And thank you guys for coming out and doing this. I like this crossover.
It was a blast.
Yeah, this was fun.
Yay.
I was like, I could keep going. I could talk for an hour about this stuff.
Specifically about Tank Girl. I
I
like it.
could talk a lot about Tank Girl. I could talk about
the room long before that's
We'll
over.
do our post show. We'll be talking about Judge Dredd because I have a lot of feelings about that.
Oh, dear.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Just Judge Dredd
Yeah.
and Tank Girl. It'll be first half Judge Dredd, second
Yep.
half Tank Girl.
There you go.
I'm in.
All right, thank you all for listening.
All right. Thanks, guys.